They say the Bitterroot Mountains don't forgive mistakes. They bury them. But on November 14th, 1884, Doris Vance made a mistake that didn't end in a grave. It ended in a proposal that terrified her more than death itself. Just 6 hours after she emptied her Winchester to save a tribal girl from a pack of starving timber wolves, Doris stood in a smoke-filled teepee, surrounded by warriors who wanted her dead. The elder looked her in the eye and didn't offer her gratitude. He offered her his hand in marriage. But this wasn't a romance. It was a death sentence in disguise. Stay tuned, because the truth behind this proposal will chill you to the bone. The air in the Montana Territory tasted like iron and ice. It was late afternoon, but the sky over Dead Man's Pass was already the color of a bruised plum, threatening a storm that would freeze a man's blood before it hit the ground. Doris Vance adjusted the strap of her Winchester 1873 rifle, the leather biting into her shoulder. She wasn't a hero. She wasn't a lawman. She was a 32-year-old widow trying to check her beaver traps before the blizzard buried her cabin. She had moved to the outskirts of Oakhaven 2 years ago after her husband, Thomas, died in a mining accident that the local magistrate, a crooked man named Silas Thorne, called unavoidable. Doris knew better. She knew the West wasn't wild. The people were. She was turning back, her breath pluming in white clouds, when the sound cut through the wind. It wasn't the wind. It was a scream. High-pitched, terrified, and unmistakably human. Doris froze. The rational part of her brain told her to keep walking. In 1884, getting involved in other people's business was a quick way to get shot. But the scream came again, followed by the guttural, wet snarl of a predator. "Damn it," Doris whispered. She racked the lever of her rifle, the metallic clack-clack sounding loud in the silence. She moved off the trail, trudging through knee-deep powder toward a ridge overlooking a frozen creek bed. What she saw made her stomach drop. Down on the ice, a girl, no older than 16, was backed against a fallen pine tree. She was dressed in the distinct elk-hide tunics of the Shadow Creek Band, a tribe that locals in Oakhaven whispered about with fear. They were known to be reclusive, fierce defenders of the Upper Valley. Currently, the girl was defending nothing but her life. 3 timber wolves, gaunt with winter hunger, circled her. A 4th lay twitching on the snow, an arrow protruding from its flank, but the girl's quiver was empty. She swung a small hatchet wildly, but she was exhausted. Her leg was dragging, blood staining the pristine white snow crimson. The alpha, a massive beast with a scarred muzzle, lunged. Doris didn't think. She dropped to one knee, leveled the Winchester, and exhaled. Crack. The bullet took the alpha in the shoulder mid-leap, spinning the beast around. It hit the ice with a yelp. The other 2 wolves flinched, turning their yellow eyes toward the ridge. "Get away from her!" Doris screamed, her voice raw. The wolves were desperate. They didn't run. One charged up the slope toward Doris, while the other snapped at the girl's exposed leg. Doris worked the lever action with practiced speed. Crack. The wolf charging her dropped 10 feet away, sliding to a stop near her boots. She swung the barrel back toward the creek. The final wolf had its jaws clamped on the girl's forearm. The girl didn't scream this time. She just grunted, driving her hatchet into the animal's neck. Doris couldn't shoot. The risk of hitting the girl was too high. She slid down the embankment, pulling her Colt Peacemaker from her hip holster. She hit the ice running, slipping, recovering, and firing a warning shot into the air. The boom echoed like thunder. The wolf released the girl and turned, snarling. Doris fired again, putting a round into the ice inches from its nose. Spooked and outmatched, the beast turned and bolted into the tree line. Silence rushed back into the valley, heavier than before. Doris holstered her gun, her heart hammering against her ribs. She approached the girl slowly, hands raised. "I'm not going to hurt you." The girl slumped against the log, clutching her bleeding arm. Her eyes were dark, wide, and filled with shock, but her grip on the bloody hatchet didn't loosen. She was beautiful, in a fierce, terrifying way, with high cheekbones and braided hair that had come loose in the struggle. "I'm Doris," she said softly. "Let me look at that arm." The girl said something in her native tongue, sharp and warning. Then, in broken, heavy English, she whispered, "You shoot loud." "Keeps the bears away," Doris said, inching closer. "If we don't stop that bleeding, the wolves won't need to come back. The cold will kill you first." The girl hesitated, then lowered the hatchet. Doris knelt, pulling a bandana from her pocket. The wound was deep, teeth marks tearing through the muscle, but no arteries were severed. The leg wound was older, a twisting sprain that had swollen to the size of a melon. "What is your name?" Doris asked, tightening the tourniquet. "Tala," the girl gritted out, wincing. "Okay, Tala, we have a problem. You can't walk on that leg, and my cabin is 3 miles south. But your people, they're north, aren't they? Up in the Table Rock Formation?" Tala nodded weakly. "My father waits." Doris looked at the sky. The storm was minutes away. If she took Tala to her cabin, the Shadow Creek warriors might track them and think Doris had kidnapped her. That would mean war. But if she tried to take Tala home, they would be walking straight into the heart of territory that no white settler had entered and returned from in 5 years. "If I take you home," Doris said, "are your people going to shoot me on sight?" Tala looked at Doris, her eyes searching the widow's face. "Maybe," she said honestly, "but if you leave me, I die." Doris sighed, helping Tala to her feet. The girl was heavy, dead weight on her left side. "Well," Doris muttered, "I never was very good at gambling." The journey was a nightmare of endurance. The storm hit 20 minutes later, a white-out blizzard that erased the world. Doris navigated by memory and the slope of the land, keeping the wind to her right cheek. Tala was tough, tougher than any man Doris had seen in the Oak Haven saloons. Despite the agony of her leg and the loss of blood, she kept moving, leaning heavily on Doris. They didn't speak much. The wind stole their words. "Why?" Tala asked after an hour, her voice barely audible over the gale. "Why what? Why save? You are settler, enemy." Doris adjusted her grip on Tala's waist. "My husband used to say that when the snow falls, we all bleed the same color red. Besides, I hate wolves." It was a lie, partially. Doris respected wolves. She hated bullies. And 3 against 1 was bullying, nature or not. By the time they reached the narrow canyon that marked the entrance to the Shadow Creek encampment, night had fallen. The cold was biting through Doris's wool coat. Her fingers were numb inside her gloves. Suddenly, the snow in front of them exploded. Doris didn't even have time to reach for her gun. 2 figures rose from the drifts. Scouts, camouflaged in white furs. Arrows were knocked and aimed at Doris's throat before she could blink. "Don't shoot!" Doris screamed, holding her empty hand up. "She's hurt!" Tala shouted something in her language, a command that cracked like a whip. The scouts hesitated. One of them, a tall man with a scar running down his chin, lowered his bow slightly and stepped forward, peering at Tala. He spoke rapidly, his tone horrified. Tala answered, gesturing to the dead wolf pelt she still carried, then to Doris. The scout looked at Doris. His expression wasn't thankful. It was calculating. He signaled behind him, and suddenly, the shadows of the canyon came alive. 6 more warriors on horseback emerged from the tree line. Doris was roughly pulled away from Tala. "Hey, careful with her leg," Doris snapped, batting a warrior's hand away. The warrior backhanded her, not hard enough to knock her out, but hard enough to split her lip. Doris staggered, tasting copper. "Stop!" Tala screamed, trying to hobble toward her. The tall scout barked an order. Doris's rifle and pistol were stripped from her. Her hands were bound with rough rawhide. She was hoisted onto a horse behind a warrior who smelled of wood smoke and sage. "I saved her life, you bastards!" Doris yelled, the fear finally piercing through her adrenaline. They didn't listen. They rode hard, deeper into the valley, through a winding path that Doris realized was a natural fortress. No wonder the army couldn't find them. They arrived at the main camp 20 minutes later. It was a sprawling circle of teepees glowing from the fires within. The convoy stopped in the center of the circle. Women and children emerged, their faces hard as they looked at the white woman bound on the horse. Doris was dragged down and shoved toward the largest structure, a lodge made of painted bison hides. Tala was being carried away by healers, but she twisted around. "Wait! Do not kill her. She is under my protection." The warriors ignored her pleas. Doris was pushed through the flap of the main lodge. Inside, it was warm. A fire burned in the center. Sitting on a pile of furs was a man who looked like he was carved from the mountain itself. His hair was iron gray, his face a road map of deep wrinkles, but his eyes were sharp, black obsidian. This was Gray Cloud, the elder of the Shadow Creek band. He didn't stand. He watched as Doris was forced to her knees by the guards. "You have brought a settler into my home," Gray Cloud said. His English was perfect, surprisingly refined. He sounded more like a judge than a tribal chief. "I brought your daughter home," Doris spat, lifting her chin. "Or your granddaughter, whoever she is." "Tala is my brother's daughter," Gray Cloud said. "And the scouts say you killed 2 wolves to do it." "3, Doris corrected. "1 ran off." Gray Cloud stared at her for a long time. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. "Silas Thorne," he said suddenly. Doris blinked. "What?" "Silas Thorne," Gray Cloud repeated. "The man who runs your town. The man who wants this valley. Are you one of his spies?" "I hate Silas Thorne," Doris said, her voice trembling with rage. "He's the reason my husband is dead. I'd sooner shoot him than work for him." Gray Cloud's eyes narrowed. He looked at the guard and nodded. The guard cut Doris's bonds. "You speak with the fire of truth," Gray Cloud said slowly, "or you are a very good liar." He stood up, his joints popping. He walked around the fire to stand over her. He wasn't threatening violence, but there was a weight to him that made Doris want to shrink away. "Tala is important to our people," he said. "She is the last of her bloodline. Saving her creates a debt." "I don't want a debt," Doris said, rubbing her raw wrists. "I just want my horse and my guns. I want to go home." "You cannot go home," Gray Cloud said simply. Doris's heart stopped. "What?" "The storm has closed the pass, and Silas Thorne's men were seen near the ridge an hour ago. If you leave, they will find you. If they find you, they will find us." "So, I'm a prisoner?" "No," Gray Cloud said. He leaned down, his face inches from hers. "You are a solution." "I don't understand." "Our laws are strict," Gray Cloud whispered. An outsider who sheds blood on our land must die or be bound to the tribe. You shed the blood of the wolf. You saved the blood of the tribe. He straightened up and looked at the warriors standing by the door. Prepare the ceremony, he commanded. Doris scrambled to her feet. Ceremony? What ceremony? Gray Cloud turned back to her, his expression unreadable. Tonight, under the eyes of the spirits, you will marry me, he said. Doris laughed. It was a nervous, hysterical sound. You're joking. I'm not marrying anyone. I'm a widow. It is not a request, Doris Vance, Gray Cloud said, his voice dropping to a rumble. By morning, you will be my wife. Or by morning, you will be dead. The choice is yours. Doris stared at the elder, her breath hitching in her throat. The firelight danced across Gray Cloud's face, casting long, skeletal shadows against the bison-hide walls of the lodge. Outside, the wind howled like a banshee, a constant reminder that escape was physically impossible. You're insane, Doris whispered, her voice trembling but defiant. I am a white woman from Pennsylvania. You are the elder of the Shadow Creek Band. In Oak Haven, they'd hang us both just for standing in the same room. A marriage? It won't save me. It will put a target on your back. Gray Cloud sat back down, his movements slow and deliberate. He picked up a pipe carved from red stone, packing it with tobacco. The target is already there, Mrs. Vance. Silas Thorne has hired the Pinkerton Agency. He claims we massacred a prospecting team near the Silver Run Creek 2 weeks ago. Doris frowned. Did you? No, Gray Cloud said, lighting the pipe with a burning twig. Thorne killed them himself. He needs a reason to bring the U.S. cavalry into this valley to wipe us out. He wants the coal deposits beneath our feet. He exhaled a plume of blue smoke. But if you, a respected widow, a white woman, were to testify that you have been living with us, that we saved you, that we are your family? I'm not your family, Doris snapped. You will be, Gray Cloud said coldly. My warriors, specifically Red Hawk, the one who brought you in, believe you are a spy. They demand blood for the intrusion. The only exception to the law of intrusion is marriage. If you are my wife, you are tribe. If you are tribe, Red Hawk cannot touch you without challenging me. Doris looked toward the entrance of the lodge. 2 guards stood with arms crossed, stone-faced. She looked down at her hands. They were calloused from chopping wood and checking traps. She was a survivor. She had survived the mine collapse that took Thomas. She had survived 2 winters alone, and she had survived the wolves. If I do this, Doris said, her voice low, it's in name only. I don't share your furs. I don't share your life. As soon as the snow clears, I go to the magistrate in Helena, not Oak Haven, and I clear this mess up. Gray Cloud's eyes glittered. Agreed. A political union. To save your life tonight and my people's lives tomorrow. Fine, Doris spat. Let's get it over with. The ceremony was nothing like the church wedding Doris had with Thomas in a small chapel in Pittsburgh. There was no white dress, no preacher, no organ music. An hour later, the central fire was roared to life. The entire camp had gathered in the large communal lodge, packed shoulder to shoulder. The smell of wet wool, sage, and unwashed bodies was overwhelming. Doris stood in the center, wearing a heavy buffalo robe that Tala had draped over her shoulders. Tala sat nearby, her legs splinted, watching with a mixture of gratitude and sorrow. Gray Cloud stood opposite Doris. He looked terrifying in his ceremonial garb, a headdress of eagle feathers that trailed to the floor, and a necklace of bear claws. Red Hawk, the aggressive scout, stepped forward. He held a bowl of dark liquid, a mixture of ash, water, and crushed berries. He glared at Doris with pure hatred. "Raise your hands," Gray Cloud commanded. Doris obeyed. Gray Cloud took the bowl from Red Hawk. He dipped his fingers into the ink-like substance and drew a line across Doris's forehead, then down her cheeks. "With this earth I bind you," Gray Cloud chanted, his voice projecting to the back of the lodge. He switched to English, clearly for the benefit of his people who needed to understand the gravity of the situation. "She is no longer other. She is us. Her blood is our blood. Her breath is our breath." He handed the bowl to Doris. "Mark me," he whispered. Doris's hand shook as she dipped her fingers into the cold liquid. She reached out, touching the elder's weathered face. His skin felt like leather. She drew the line across his forehead as she had seen him do. "With this earth," Doris stammered, her voice gaining strength, I bind you." A murmur went through the crowd. It wasn't applause. It was a shifting of energy. The tension that had been poised to snap Doris's neck suddenly dissipated, replaced by a heavy, solemn acceptance. Gray Cloud took a knife from his belt. For a second, Doris flinched, thinking he had lied. But he simply cut a lock of his own hair, then a lock of hers. He tied them together with a leather strip and tossed them into the fire. The hair sizzled and vanished. "It is done," Gray Cloud announced. "Go to your lodges. The storm is breaking." The crowd dispersed slowly, many casting curious glances at the white squaw, who had just become the matriarch of their tribe. Doris was left standing alone with Gray Cloud. The adrenaline crashed, leaving her knees weak. "You sleep there," Gray Cloud said, pointing to a pile of furs on the far side of the lodge, distinct and separate from his own. "Do not try to leave the lodge tonight. Red Hawk will be watching the door. He hopes you will try to run, so he has an excuse to put an arrow in your back." Doris collapsed onto the furs, pulling the buffalo robe tight around her. She watched the dying embers of the fire, listening to the wind. She was Mrs. Doris Vance, widow of Thomas Vance. And now she was the wife of a tribal chief in a valley that didn't exist on any map. She closed her eyes, but sleep was a distant hope. She kept her hand on the hidden derringer inside her boot, the one weapon the scouts hadn't found. Morning broke with a blinding brilliance. The storm had dumped 3 feet of snow, transforming the valley into a glittering bowl of white diamond. Doris woke to the smell of roasting meat. Her stomach grumbled, reminding her she hadn't eaten in 24 hours. She sat up, stiff and sore. Gray Cloud was gone. She pushed the heavy flap of the teepee open and stepped out. The brightness hurt her eyes. The camp was a hive of activity. Men were clearing snow from the pathways. Women were scraping hides, and children were playing in the drifts. For a moment, nobody noticed her. Then, a silence rippled outward from the elder's lodge. Eyes turned toward her. But this time, there was no hostility. There was curiosity, and in some faces, respect. She was the woman who killed the wolves. She was the elder's wife. Tala hobbled toward her, using a makeshift crutch made from a tree branch. "Good morning, Mother," Tala said, a mischievous glint in her dark eyes. Doris winced. "Don't call me that. Please, Doris is fine." Tala smiled, though her face was pale from blood loss. "My uncle, he is a hard man, but he keeps his word. You are safe here." "Safe is a relative term," Doris muttered, scanning the perimeter. She saw Red Hawk standing near the horse corral, watching her like a hawk watching a field mouse. "Come," Tala said. "Eat. We have elk." Doris followed Tala to a communal fire. As she ate, she observed the camp. It wasn't the savage den of thieves Silas Thorne had described in his town meetings. It was organized, disciplined, and desperately poor. The blankets were threadbare. The tools were old. This was a people on the brink of starvation, pushed into the highest, coldest part of the mountains. "Where is Gray Cloud?" Doris asked, wiping grease from her chin. "He is meeting with the council," Tala said, lowering her voice. "They are deciding what to do about the soldiers." "Soldiers?" "Thorne's men. The scouts saw blue coats on the ridge before the storm. If they bring the cannon—" Tala trailed off, fear flickering in her eyes. Doris felt a pang of guilt. She was part of the world that was hunting them. She stood up. "I need to talk to him. He is in the council lodge. You cannot go in. Only warriors." "I'm his wife," Doris said, playing the only card she had. "That makes me family, right?" She marched toward the council lodge, a large structure near the center of camp. 2 guards stepped in her way, crossing their spears. "Move," Doris commanded. She didn't shout. She used the same tone she used when scolding a stubborn mule. "I have news about Silas Thorne that your elder needs to hear." The guards hesitated. From inside, Gray Cloud's voice boomed. "Let her in." Doris stepped inside. The air was thick with smoke. 5 men sat in a circle. Gray Cloud was at the head. In the center of the circle lay a map, a U.S. Army survey map, surprisingly detailed. "My wife wishes to speak," Gray Cloud said, the word wife sounding dry as dust. "I know Silas Thorne," Doris said, stepping into the light. "I know how he thinks. He won't attack from the ridge. It's too steep for cannons. He'll come through the whispering gorge." Red Hawk sneered. "The gorge is flooded. Ice breaks. Horses die." "Exactly," Doris said, turning to face him. "He'll send his heavy guns the long way to draw your attention. But his men, his hired killers, they'll come on foot through the gorge. They did it 3 years ago to bust the miners' strike at Coal Creek. They wrapped their boots in burlap to silence their steps and used the frozen river as a highway." The room went silent. The tactics she described were ruthless, cowardly, and exactly what Thorne would do. Gray Cloud looked at her with a new expression. It wasn't warmth, but it was validation. "You speak with the knowledge of war." "I speak with the knowledge of a woman who listened to her husband complain about Thorne's tactics every night for 5 years," Doris replied. She looked down at the map, and that was when she saw it. Sitting on a small wooden crate next to Gray Cloud's knee was a pocket watch. It was silver, dented on one side, with an engraving of a train on the cover. Doris's blood turned to ice. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. She stopped breathing. She walked forward, her eyes locked on the object. The warriors tensed, hands drifting to their knives, but Gray Cloud held up a hand to stop them. Doris reached out and picked up the watch. Her thumb rubbed the dent. She knew that dent. Thomas had dropped it the day he proposed to her. She popped the latch. The lid swung open. Inside, pasted into the metal, was a tiny, faded daguerreotype picture. A picture of her. "Where did you get this?" Doris whispered. The sound was dangerous, low, and vibrating with sudden, violent fury. Gray Cloud remained seated, his face impassive. "Doris." "I said, where did you get this?" She screamed, spinning on him. "This belonged to my husband, Thomas Vance. You said Thorne killed the miners. You said you were innocent." She fumbled for the derringer in her boot, blinded by grief and rage. "You killed him," You killed Thomas." "I did not kill him," Gray Cloud roared, standing up. His voice shook the lodge walls. Doris had the small pistol in her hand now, leveled at the elder's chest. The other 4 warriors had their bows drawn, arrows aimed at her heart. It was a Mexican standoff. "Then why do you have his watch?" Doris cried, tears spilling over. "He was buried with it. The coffin was sealed." "The coffin was empty," Gray Cloud shouted back. The words hung in the air like smoke. Doris lowered the gun slightly. "What?" Gray Cloud signaled the warriors to lower their bows. He looked tired, suddenly ancient. "Thomas Vance did not die in a mine collapse, Doris," Gray Cloud said softly. "He was shot by Silas Thorne because Thomas Vance was not just a miner. He was my brother's blood friend. He was the one bringing us food during the starving winter. He was our spy." Doris shook her head, denial warring with the impossible truth. "No, Thomas hated the frontier. He barely left the cabin." "He left every night," Gray Cloud said. "He was helping us map the gold deposits so we could claim them legally before Thorne did. Thorne found out. He shot Thomas and staged the accident." Gray Cloud took a step closer. "I took the watch from his body before Thorne's men could loot him. I have kept it for 2 years, waiting." "Waiting for what?" Doris choked out. "Waiting for you," Gray Cloud said. "Thomas told me that if anything happened to him, I was to give this to you. He said the watch holds the key, not to the past, but to the future." Doris looked down at the watch. She turned it over in her hands. It felt heavy. She noticed a seam she had never seen before on the back casing. She dug her fingernail into it and twisted. The back popped off. A small, folded piece of onion skin paper fell out. Doris unfolded it with trembling fingers. It wasn't a love letter. It was a deed. A federal land deed, dated 3 years prior, granting the entirety of the Shadow Creek Valley to Mr. Thomas Vance. "He bought it," Doris whispered, realizing the enormity of the paper in her hand. "He used his savings. He bought the land your tribe lives on." "He bought it to give it back to us," Gray Cloud said, "but he died before he could transfer the title." He looked at Doris, his dark eyes burning. "You are his widow. You are his sole heir. Do you understand now, Doris? Silas Thorne isn't hunting us because we are savages. He is hunting us because he needs that piece of paper you are holding. And now, you are the only thing standing between my people and extinction." The Whispering Gorge earned its name because the wind passing through the narrow, high rock walls sounded like voices muttering the secrets of the dead. In summer, it was a raging river. In November, it was a treacherous highway of jagged ice, slick and unpredictable. Doris lay prone on a ridge overlooking the gorge, her Winchester nestled into a groove in the granite. Beside her lay Red Hawk. The animosity between them hadn't vanished, but it had been replaced by a cold, professional truce. They were soldiers now, fighting the same war. "They are late," Red Hawk whispered, his breath puffing in the freezing air. "Thorne waits for the sun to hit the eyes of the defenders," Doris murmured, adjusting her sight. "He's a coward, but he's a tactical coward." She checked the deed inside her coat pocket. It felt hot against her ribs, a piece of paper worth more than all the gold in Montana. It was the only reason she was up here, freezing, instead of running for the border. This wasn't just land anymore. It was Thomas's legacy. Below them, the gorge was silent. But then, a shadow detached itself from the rock wall. Doris squinted. A man moved onto the ice below. He was wrapped in gray wool, his boots covered in burlap sacks, just as she had predicted. He moved silently, testing the ice with a spiked pole. Behind him, another figure emerged. Then another. A column of 20 men. Mercenaries. The dregs of the frontier saloons, hired for $5 a day to kill women and children. Leading them was a man Doris recognized with a jolt of nausea. Dutch Kincaid, a bounty hunter known for two things: his cruelty and his dog. The beast trotted beside him, a massive, scarred, mastiff bloodhound mix named Brutus. The dog was legendary in the territory for tracking runaway miners and tearing them apart before the law could arrive. The dog wore a thick leather collar studded with brass, and even from this distance, Doris could see the intelligence in the animal's movements. It wasn't just a pet, it was a weapon. "That's Kincaid," Doris whispered, "and his dog. If we miss, that dog will find every hiding spot in this valley." Red Hawk knocked an arrow. "Then we do not miss." "Wait," Doris commanded, putting a hand on his bow arm. "Let them reach the bottleneck. The ice is thinnest there." The column moved deeper into the trap. The silence was agonizing. Doris's heart beat a frantic rhythm against the frozen ground. For Thomas, she thought. When the middle of the column stepped onto the dark, translucent patch of ice in the center of the gorge, Doris squeezed the trigger. Crack. The shot echoed like a cannon blast in the confined space. The bullet didn't hit a man. It hit the ice right between the feet of the lead mercenary. The structural integrity of the frozen river shattered. With a sound like a cracking whip, spiderwebs of white fractures shot out in every direction. "Ambush!" Kincaid screamed, diving toward the snowbank. The ice gave way. 3 mercenaries dropped instantly into the freezing black water below. Their screams were cut short as the current dragged them under the ice sheet. "Fire!" Red Hawk roared. From the cliffs above, the Shadow Creek archers unleashed a rain of arrows. The gorge erupted into chaos. Gunfire sparked against the rocks. The mercenaries, seasoned killers, scrambled for cover behind boulders, returning fire with heavy Henry repeating rifles. Doris worked the lever of her Winchester. Clack bang, clack bang. She wasn't shooting to kill. She was shooting to suppress, keeping their heads down so the archers could work. But Kincaid was smart. He wasn't firing back blindly. He was pointing. "Up there, the ridge! Get the dog!" He released the chain leash. Brutus launched himself up the steep, snowy embankment. The dog moved with terrifying speed, ignoring the slippery rocks, a missile of muscle and teeth aimed straight for Doris's position. "Doris!" Red Hawk shouted, seeing the beast ascending. Doris swung her rifle, but a bullet from Kincaid's men ricocheted off the rock next to her face, sending stone splinters into her cheek. She flinched, blinded for a second. When she opened her eyes, the dog was 10 feet away, airborne, jaws open. Doris didn't have time to work the lever. She rolled onto her back, swinging the heavy walnut stock of the rifle like a club. She connected with the dog's shoulder mid-air, knocking the 100-pound animal off course. Brutus hit the snow, snarling, and scrambled for purchase. He lunged again, snapping at her boot. Doris kicked out, her heel connecting with the dog's nose, but Brutus clamped down on the thick leather of her boot, thrashing his head. He was trying to drag her off the cliff edge. "Let go!" Doris screamed, reaching for her Colt. Suddenly, a shadow blocked the sun. Red Hawk leaped from his cover, landing on the dog's back. He didn't use his knife. He wrapped his arm around the beast's neck in a chokehold, wrestling the animal into the deep snow. Brutus released Doris, turning his fury on Red Hawk. The warrior and the dog rolled toward the precipice. Red Hawk! Doris scrambled forward. She leveled her pistol. She couldn't shoot. They were a tangle of limbs. Red Hawk, realizing he couldn't overpower the beast, did the unthinkable. He threw his weight backward. Both man and dog tumbled over the edge of the ridge, falling 20 feet into a deep snowdrift below. Doris crawled to the edge. Below, Red Hawk was already up, limping toward the cover of the trees. The dog, stunned by the fall, was shaking its head, disoriented. Kincaid's voice boomed from the gorge floor. Pull back to the timber. The mercenaries, having lost 5 men to the ice and arrows, retreated, dragging their wounded. The skirmish was over. But as the smoke cleared, Doris looked down at the gorge. The ice was broken, blood-stained. They had held the line. But she knew this was just the jab. The haymaker was coming. The victory at Whispering Gorge bought them 6 hours of peace. By nightfall, the mood in the Shadow Creek camp was grim. They had wounded 10 mercenaries and killed 5, but the tribe had paid a price. 2 young warriors were dead. Red Hawk had returned, his arm mauled by the dog, needing 40 stitches that the tribal healer sewed with gut string and grim determination. Doris sat in the elder's lodge, cleaning her rifle. Her hands were steady, but her mind was racing. Gray Cloud entered, looking more tired than she had ever seen him. They have set up camp at the canyon mouth, he said, sitting heavily by the fire. They are not attacking. They are waiting. They're waiting for the cannon, Doris said, or the Gatling gun. Thorn won't risk his men again. He'll just shell us into oblivion from a distance. Gray Cloud looked at her. You fought well, Doris. Red Hawk says you saved the ridge. Red Hawk saved me, she corrected. He threw himself off a cliff to get that dog off me. He respects courage, Gray Cloud said. You have earned your place. I don't want a place, Doris said, holstering her gun. I want to stop this. Suddenly, a shout went up from outside. Rider! Single rider! Doris and Gray Cloud rushed out. A lone man on a black horse was approaching the camp entrance under a white flag of truce. He wore a fine suit that looked ridiculous against the snow, and a bowler hat. It was Silas Thorne. He stopped 20 yards from the defensive line. He didn't look scared. He looked like a man who held all the aces. I wish to speak to the widow Vance, Thorne shouted, his voice oily and smooth. The warriors looked to Gray Cloud. He nodded. Doris stepped forward, flanked by Gray Cloud and a bandaged Red Hawk. I'm here, Silas, she called out. Thorne smiled, tipping his hat. Doris, my dear, I was so worried when we found your empty cabin. I thought the savages had taken you, but I see. You've gone native. A shame. Thomas was a good man. He wouldn't have wanted this. Don't you speak his name, Doris warned, walking closer until she was at the barrier. I know what you did, Silas. I know you shot him. Thorne's smile didn't falter, but his eyes went cold. Hysteria caused by grief. Tragic. Listen to me, Doris. I have a regiment of volunteers and a mountain howitzer cannon sitting 3 miles back. At dawn, I'm going to turn this valley into a crater. He paused, looking at the starving women and children peeking out from the teepees. However, Thorne continued, I am a merciful man. Walk out of here, Doris. Bring me the personal effects that Thomas might have left with these people, specifically any papers. Do that, and I let you live. I'll even give you a train ticket back east. And the tribe? Doris asked. The tribe are trespassing on federal land, Thorne shrugged. They will be removed. Forcibly. Doris laughed. It was a dry, sharp sound. She reached into her coat and pulled out the deed. She didn't unfold it, but she held it up, so the moonlight caught the federal seal. Thorne's eyes snapped to the paper. His demeanor changed instantly. The casual arrogance vanished, replaced by a hungry, desperate intensity. "You didn't find it on him because he didn't have it, Silas," Doris said loudly, making sure his men could hear. "He mailed it to a lawyer in Helena before he met you that day. It only came back to the valley recently." It was a lie, but a believable one. "That is a forgery," Thorne hissed. "Is it?" Doris countered. "It has the seal of the Department of the Interior. It says this land, all of it, from the creek to the peaks, is the private property of Thomas Vance. And as his widow, it's mine. These people aren't trespassing. They are my guests." She took a step closer to the barrier. "If you fire that cannon, Silas, you are firing on a white woman, a U.S. citizen, on her own private property. The Army won't cover for you on that. The governor won't cover for you. You'll hang." Thorne sat on his horse, his face turning a violent shade of red. He knew she was right. If the deed existed, his legal claim and his excuse for a massacre evaporated. He couldn't call in the cavalry to remove people from private land without a court order, and a court order would expose his corruption. "You think a piece of paper stops a bullet, Doris?" Thorne whispered, leaning down over his saddle. "No," Doris said, her hand hovering over her Colt. "But it stops your money. The investors in New York won't touch a mine with a disputed title. You're done, Silas." Thorne straightened up. He looked at the deed, then at Doris, then at the warriors behind her. "You have until dawn," Thorne said, his voice tight. "If that deed isn't in my hand by sunrise, I won't use the cannon. I'll send the dog, and the men, and we will kill every living thing in this valley and burn the paper over your corpses. No witnesses, no crime." He wheeled his horse around and galloped back into the darkness. Doris stood trembling in the snow. "He is bluffing?" Gray Cloud asked quietly. "No," Doris said, watching the darkness swallow the rider. "He's cornered. A cornered rat doesn't surrender. It bites." She turned to Red Hawk. "How is your arm?" "It works," Red Hawk grunted. "Good," Doris said, "because we aren't waiting for dawn. If we wait, we die. We have to go to them." "Attack the camp?" Gray Cloud frowned. "We are outnumbered 3-1. "Not the camp," Doris said, her eyes hard. "Thorne. We cut the head off the snake. He's confident. He thinks we're scared. He'll be in his command tent, drinking whiskey and waiting for sunrise." She looked at the deed in her hand, then shoved it back into her pocket. "I need 3 volunteers," she said. "We're going hunting." "I will go," Red Hawk said immediately. "I will go," Tala said, stepping forward, hobbling but fierce. "No," Doris shook her head. "Tala, you can't walk." "I can ride," Tala said, "and I know the back trails better than anyone. I can get us behind their sentries." Doris looked at the girl, then at the elder. Gray Cloud nodded slowly. "Take the best horses," Gray Cloud said. "And Doris." He looked at her with something that looked like pride. "Make him pay." The enemy camp was a smudge of orange firelight against the black canvas of the forest. It smelled of stale coffee, cheap whiskey, and damp wool. Tala had been right. The deer trail had led them down a ravine that bypassed the sentries entirely, dumping them out behind the supply wagons. Doris, Red Hawk, and Tala dismounted, tying their horses to a sapling. "The command tent is the large one," Doris whispered, pointing to a canvas structure glowing from within, distinct from the smaller pup tents of the mercenaries. That's where Thorn is. The dog is there too, Red Hawk murmured. He had his knife in his good hand, his bow slung over his shoulder. I can smell him. Tala, Doris said, gripping the girl's shoulder. You know what to do? Tala nodded, her face set in grim determination. She held a bundle of dry sage and oil-soaked rags. I light the wagons. They run to the fire. You go to the snake. Go, Doris commanded. Tala slipped away into the shadows like a ghost. Doris and Red Hawk crouched, waiting. 3 minutes passed. An eternity. Then a flicker of light erupted on the far side of the camp. Then another. Suddenly, a whoosh of flame consumed the canvas cover of a supply wagon. Fire! The ammo wagon! Fire! Tala's voice screamed out, disguised as panic. The camp erupted. Drunken mercenaries stumbled out of their tents, pulling up suspenders and grabbing buckets. The chaos was instant and total. Men ran toward the blaze, shouting orders that nobody listened to. Now, Doris hissed. She and Red Hawk sprinted across the open ground toward the command tent. They were 10 feet away when a low, rumbling growl stopped them cold. Brutus. The massive dog stepped out from the shadows of the tent entrance. He wasn't barking. He was hunting. His eyes locked onto Doris. He remembered her. Red Hawk didn't hesitate. Go! He shouted, and he charged the beast. The dog sprang, meeting Red Hawk in a collision of teeth and muscle. But Red Hawk had learned. He didn't try to fight the dog's strength. He jammed his forearm, wrapped in thick layers of raw hide, into the dog's jaws, taking the bite, and drove them both backward into a stack of crates, tangling the dog in the debris. Doris didn't look back. She slashed the tent flap open with her knife and burst inside. Silas Thorne was standing behind a makeshift desk, a glass of brandy in one hand, a heavy Schofield revolver in the other. He didn't look surprised. He looked annoyed. I expected the Indian, Thorne sneered, leveling the gun at her chest. But the widow? You have more grit than I gave you credit for, Doris. Doris stood frozen. Her Colt pointed at him. Her heart was hammering so hard she thought it might burst. Drop the gun, Silas, she said, her voice shaking but lethal. It's over. The camp is burning. Your men are distracted. My men are paid to be distracted, Thorne laughed. He took a step forward. You're trembling, my dear. You've never shot a man, have you? Wolves, yes. But a man, looking him in the eye? He cocked the hammer of his revolver. The click was deafening. I'm going to count to 3, Thorne said. Then I'm going to put a bullet in your heart and take that deed off your corpse. 1. Doris's finger tightened on the trigger. Just pull it, she screamed internally. But the civilized part of her, the part that was a miner's wife from Pennsylvania, hesitated. 2. Thorne grinned. He saw the hesitation. He knew he had won. Suddenly, the back of the tent ripped open. Thorne spun around, distracted for a fraction of a second. It wasn't a person. It was the dog, Brutus, thrown backward through the canvas by Red Hawk, who crashed in after him, bloody but ferocious. The distraction was all Doris needed. She didn't think about civilization. She didn't think about the law. She thought about Thomas. Bang! The Colt bucked in her hand. Thorne staggered back, clutching his chest. He looked down, a look of genuine confusion on his face. The brandy glass shattered on the floor. He looked up at Doris, his mouth opening to speak, but only blood came out. He collapsed backward, overturning the desk, the Schofield flying from his hand. Silence rushed into the tent, heavy and absolute. Outside, the shouting was dying down. Red Hawk stood over the dog, which lay unconscious or dead in the corner. He looked at Doris, then at Thorne's body. "Is it done?" he asked, his breathing ragged. Doris walked forward. She looked down at the man who had ruined her life, the man who had tried to wipe out a people for profit. She reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper, the telegram to the Pinkertons, ordering the attack at dawn. "It's done," Doris whispered. She walked out of the tent. The firelight caught her silhouette. Several mercenaries had turned from the fire, weapons drawn, seeing the intruder. Doris didn't run. She raised her hand, holding Silas Thorne's bowler hat. She tossed it into the mud at their feet. "Thorne is dead!" she screamed, her voice cutting through the night air. "The contract is void. There is no one left to pay you." The mercenaries froze. They looked at the hat. They looked at the burning wagons. They looked at the fierce woman standing before the tent, flanked by a warrior covered in blood. Dutch Kincaid, the leader of the mercenaries, stepped forward. He looked at the command tent, then back at Doris. He spat on the ground. "I don't fight for free," Kincaid grunted. He signaled to his men. "Pack it up. We're moving out." Doris watched them go. Her knees gave out, and she sank into the snow. Tala ran to her, hugging her fiercely. Red Hawk placed a hand on her shoulder. As the sun began to crest over the Bitterroot Mountains, painting the snow in shades of pink and gold, Doris Vance looked out over the valley. It was no longer just a frozen wilderness. It was home. She wasn't just a widow anymore. She was the guardian of Shadow Creek, and she knew that as long as she held that deed, and as long as she had this family, no wolf, on 4 legs or 2, would ever take this valley from them. And that is the legend of Doris Vance. While history books often overlook the small wars of the frontier, the journals found in the Helena archives in 1924 tell a different story. Doris didn't return to the east. She remained in the valley for the rest of her life, serving as the bridge between the Shadow Creek Band and the encroaching world. The marriage that started as a death sentence became a 50-year partnership that protected the valley until it was eventually designated a protected heritage site. It's a reminder that sometimes the people we think are our enemies are the only ones who can save us, and that courage isn't about not being scared. It's about being terrified and pulling the trigger anyway. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, please hit that like button. It helps the channel immensely. Make sure to subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss next week's saga from the untold history of the Wild West. What would you have done in Doris's shoes? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching,